Welcome to Tactical
Hello,
Edge.
buenos dias.
We never had you at Tactical Edge before. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. As you can see, I'm wearing my hat from Cartagena
From
from the
Cartagena.
pre-pandemic times.
Yeah.
Those were such good times.
Oh man, love it, love it, and great memories. We still talk about the first CISO Latin Summit in Cartagena, and
Yeah.
yeah, it was fantastic. How are things with Cisco Secure? And
Secure as ever. No, as you can imagine, we are also very busy with
mm,
the Log4j response, continuously updating because, we have a very big portfolio. And so as we are, getting definitive answers, we're updating things, we're helping customers who are being impacted by it. And our Talos intelligence team is just cranking out
mm.
those indicators of exploitation. And yeah, it's a very exciting time.
So I see that you're on the side of Log4j. Bryson and
Well,
I Log4j.
Log4j, whatever. But as soon as I saw it, I thought, okay, let's try out Log4j and see how that works.
Yeah, that sticks. That was very funny. So Wendy, what's our presentation conversation today about?
Well, everybody's having a tough time right now. So I'm going to talk about our uncomfortable relationship with the future, which is kind of, everybody sitting around going, oh my God, what could be coming next?
Yeah.
Because we do that a lot in cybersecurity.
All right.
So that's what I thought I'd talk about, if that's all right with you.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you, Wendy, and everyone. Wendy Nather, head of advisory CISOs at a small company called Cisco. Some of you may have heard of them. So Wendy, thank you so much. Welcome to Tactical Edge.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I do want to encourage everyone to ask questions
Mhm.
in the chat. Please ask them in Spanish if you feel more comfortable doing that.
Yes.
I can read some Spanish, I just can't speak it without making everybody laugh. So, please feel free to interact. But I am going to talk about how to deal with our uncomfortable relationship with the future. This is my boss, Doug Song, who is co-founder of Duo Security, which was acquired by Cisco. And just after they took this shot, he fell off the fire hydrant and fractured his hand. And bless him, he got right back up and took another photo during this photo shoot with a fractured hand. But as you can see, incidents can happen in milliseconds, but innovation in security usually takes years. And this is our big problem. So we can't really react in the appropriate time span. Things can happen at machine speed, and we are not at machine speed, and reacting often requires human decisions. And we're also overdriving our headlights quite a bit, meaning we're driving faster than we can see in front of us. So these are two reasons why we feel very uncomfortable about the future, and we need to try to get better about um, reacting better, planning better, and then planning to react better. And this is what I'm going to talk about and suggest some things. And I would love to hear ideas from the audience as well. So one of the things that we can do, I'm going to start also by talking about Sunil Yu. Even though Bryson just mentioned his cyber defense matrix, but I think that Sunil is one of the great thinkers of our time in cybersecurity. He also has a model that he calls distributed, immutable, and ephemeral, which spells out DIE, and I'm not sure that's a great acronym. I'm trying to get him to change it. But if you want to hear the talk in which he introduced that was at RSA last year. He talks about the ideas that if you can make your infrastructure more distributed and more immutable and more ephemeral, then you will come out ahead. So if things are distributed, if you have copies of things everywhere, obviously it makes it harder to do a distributed denial of service attack. So they're more DDoS resistant. You're addressing availability a little bit better. And if you create systems that are immutable, that means they're not meant to be changed. They should not change. Instead of changing them, you just overwrite them. Think of, instances that are built on templates. And if something is wrong with it, instead of trying to fix it, you just replace it with another copy. If these systems are not meant to be changed, then if somebody tries to change them, like an attacker, it will be easier to detect and reverse those changes. So if you're looking at something and something is changing, often you have to think, well, is somebody on our team doing that on purpose, or is that an attacker? But if something's never supposed to change, that makes it easier, and then you can go, that should never happen. Wipe, restore. So this helps build integrity in your systems if you can create systems that are not supposed to be changed at all. And then finally, ephemeral, which means lasting only a short time. If you have things like cloud instances that only spin up long enough to perform a given operation or a transaction, and then they spin down again. First of all, it drives its individual value as an asset closer to zero because it's only spun up to do one thing. It does it, it spins down again, and it protects against attacker persistence because if it's only there for a short time, the attacker does not have time to set up anything for the next time it spins up. So these three things, distributed, immutable, and ephemeral, are Sunil's principles that he is proposing. To be honest, I'm not really sure that I think that all of this is really achievable, especially ephemeral systems, because if you have something like a database, you're going to need it up all the time. Everybody has to get to it, and you can't just wipe and restore the data. The whole point of it is to have the most current changing data. So I don't know. I would love to hear what you think. It's a really interesting idea, though, and that's why I bring it up for this discussion. So let's focus around ephemerality, around keeping things only a very short time to protect against attackers. He describes two types of assets as being pets and cattle. And the difference between pets and cattle, Sunil says, is that pets, you give them a pronounceable name, despite all the jokes about naming your pet, XZ angle bracket, Q52, to name after your password. But that they're given a pronounceable name, you take them to the vet when they're sick, and you indulge their idiosyncrasies. So when one of my cats, Luna, tries to climb up and go to sleep in my arms when I'm in the middle of working, generally I let her because, aw, she's so cute. Now, on the other hand, cattle, Sunil says, are given a designation. And actually, I think this kind of reveals that Sunil hasn't actually worked on a farm, because I know plenty of farmers who do love and name their cattle just as they do pets. But let's go with this. He says they're given a designation, they're cow number 25, and they're shot or they're dumped whenever they're sick. And there are no exceptions. And that can certainly be applied to things like ephemeral cloud instances where they're all supposed to be the same, as opposed to a server where you've kept it for a very long time. It's got a pronounceable name despite, whatever code, production name you have for it, because everybody's going to, I'm going to log into Squiggy because there's something wrong. I think, there's a memory leak. I'm going to go fix it. So what the idea is that you want to have more cattle than pets. You want to have more assets that you don't have to spend an extra amount of custom time on, fixing individually, coddling them, keeping them up, keeping them alive. You want to have cattle that you can just spin down or replace or overwrite or swap out whenever you need to do that. And that is Sunil's theory. Again, love to hear your comments on this. Here's another way in which we can react better. Now, Bryson was talking about threat intelligence and threat intelligence sharing, and I want to point out that for as long as I can remember, people have always complained that the defender has to be right all the time and the attacker only has to be right once. And that's true from a certain perspective. But if you think about it in the context of sharing threat intelligence, now, anytime you see something, that means the attacker has been exposed. And if you share it everywhere, then that attacker is, is on the defense all of a sudden. They're on the ropes. So as soon as you find something, their cover is blown. They have to be silent all the time, and you only have to spot it once. So I like thinking about it that way. And let's think about the sort of ways that we can make life tougher for the attacker. If you're at all familiar with David J. Bianco's Pyramid of Pain, I love this. This is a list of the different indicators of compromise and how easy they are for the attacker to change once we've spotted them and started sharing them. The idea is you want to pick indicators from the top of this pyramid because they're harder for the attacker to change. If you share with everybody what tool an attacker's using, attackers, just like defenders, love their tools. They don't want to give them up. They may have spent a long time writing them. So if you share an indicator about that, it's going to be a pain for them. And they can't react very quickly to change it to go back undercover. TTPs, tactics, I forget what TTPs are. It's early in the morning for me, I'm sorry. But things like, an attacker's actual name, that's really hard for them to change. So the higher up in this pyramid you can get, the more difficult you're going to make it in terms of time for the attacker. Now, don't bother with things like hash values, because I know a lot of organizations who never see the same hash, even if they're getting the same malware. It's just too easy for the attacker to tweak something and deliver something with a different hash to every victim. So, if you're going to share hash values, that's not very useful. IP addresses, again, the same. Those are pretty easy to change. Even domain names, they manage to automate rotating through domain names. However, I did hear a really good story at a conference in Israel this year where some malware researchers, I forget which one they were researching, but they found that the attacker had been using their own custom infrastructure with their own custom domain names, and they were getting blocked very easily by defenders. So what they did was they moved some of their infrastructure to a third-party provider. I think it was like Dropbox or something that everybody uses, and a defender can't easily block because they're also using Dropbox. So they moved to a commercial provider, but that made it easy for the victim to go to Dropbox and say, hey, you've got somebody sharing malware and you need to cut them off. So that attacker was able to be defeated because it was hard for them to move platforms in time to evade the countermeasures by the defender. So yay, I was very excited to hear that kind of story. So we want to react faster. As I used to say as a system administrator, when in doubt, swap it out. Wherever you can configure systems to do that, that's great. We want to minimize the persistence for us. We want to keep things as short-lived as possible, but we want to maximize persistence for the attacker. We want them to be stuck with the infrastructure that they're using and unable to change very quickly. And so this helps if you see it once, share it everywhere. Now let's talk about automating the right things, because I know everybody talks about automation as a way of saving time. However, this is my theory about automation. I believe that automation goes best with certainty, precision, transparency, and commitment. And what I mean by this is, for automation, first of all, you need to be really certain that you want that action to happen. I was talking with a CISO just the other day who said, we have automated responses, but they're also checked out by a security engineer to make sure that it wasn't a false positive. And I said, well, how can you automate something if you're, how are you calling it automated if somebody is actually checking it out first? And he said, oh, they're not checking it out first. The automated response happens, and then we check later to see if it was a false positive. So, okay, if that works for you, if you want to be really certain that nothing bad is going to happen when you automate that response, then great. You need that certainty. The next thing you need is precision. So you want to make sure that the action that you're taking is limited in scope to only the thing that you want to affect, that it doesn't accidentally affect things out of scope, that it doesn't, make sure you don't have too many dependencies that are affected by that automated action. You need transparency, which means that everybody who is affected by that automation understands what it's supposed to do, so that you can tell, first of all, they know what to expect. Secondly, they know what kind of inputs are going to trigger it, and they know what the outputs are going to be. They know what the effect is going to be. And that will probably need to be shared wider outside of your immediate organization, certainly wider than the person who wrote the automation. You have to make sure that everyone, again, who is involved with it understands what it's supposed to do. And then finally, you need commitment. And commitment means that you are sure that you're going to be able to set it up and leave it there. And you don't have to keep coming back and going, well, I didn't want it to do that. I think I better fix that. Because if you're having to tweak it every couple of weeks, then that's really not automation. That's kind of more like a shell script. So you have to be sure that you can set it and forget it. And generally, the more scoped and precise and modular your automation is, the better off you're going to be. I was privileged to visit the Security Operations Center of Target one year. This was well after their breach, and they had built up a really great organization. And one of the things that they would do regularly is look at the headlines of breaches and say, what would this look like in our organization? Could we detect it? And once they figured out how to detect it, they would automate that detection. So therefore, they would take the skill of their best detectors and responders, and they would codify that in automation just for that particular thing, and then they would move on so that the human hunters could focus on more difficult and complicated things. So anything that they could automate a piece of, they would do that. So if you're thinking about automation and you're thinking, oh gosh, I'm really scared, I don't know if I can do this, think small and think incremental with your automation. Because again, anything that you can automate is going to help you in the future, but it doesn't have to mean that your SOC is running unattended. Don't worry about that. And by the way, these things about automation is why blockchain's not going to solve everything. I'm sorry. If you're a blockchain fan, catch me outside. We'll have a discussion. But things like commitment, where you cannot go back and change things, is also why blockchain doesn't work for everything. If you can make something immutable and never change it, great. But most of us, make mistakes, things change. We have to change things every so often. So that's another thing about automation. Don't forget to ask questions. Please be asking questions. Now, how do we future-proof our security? Because this is about the future. Let me introduce you to Heather Vescent, who is a futurist. And it doesn't mean that she stares into a crystal ball. She actually stares into data. She also gave a really great talk at RSA last year about imagining the future of security. And here are some of the things that she has taught me about looking into the future. First of all, you can't actually predict anything unless you absolutely control it. So I'm sorry, this is not something where you can forecast and say, oh yeah, this is totally going to happen, unless you're making it happen. Like, with the stock market, you better not be controlling everything in the stock market, because that's kind of illegal. And it's not just one future. We tend to think about the past as being one past. We think about now as being one present. But then we think of the future sometimes as the one future, but it's a bunch of possibilities, and a lot of them are equal. The final thing you need to know is that you don't know when something might happen. Even if you're pretty sure something's going to happen, you don't know the timing, which is why, even though people had been talking about pandemics for years and getting ready for them, we didn't know exactly when it would happen, and therefore we were caught by surprise when it did, except for the epidemiologists who kept going, "I told you so." But, for the rest of us, we might imagine that something will happen in the future. But again, timing is everything. So this is one of the things that Heather looks at when she is trying to look at trends for the future. Trends are not just technology trends. They can happen in any kind of space, like in the social space, lifestyle changes or education changes, health. Hello, a health trend just kind of disrupted the last 2 years for us. There is technology trends. You can look at economic trends, which can also be very important in how they affect cybersecurity. Environmental changes, climate change. How is climate change going to affect cybersecurity in the future? And political changes, those things change all the time. And even our values. If you look at our current value trends and you thought, what if they changed? How would that affect cybersecurity? Let's take an example of right now, we do not make individual developers liable if they write a bug into software. But what if we did? What if we changed that? And everybody was liable for any flaw that they wrote in code. How do you think it would change the supply of coders? How do you think it would change education? How would it change the market for coders? How would it change other types of ancillary quality assurance that would be built around these things? What if every person who wrote code had to take out an individual insurance policy? These are all the things that she speculates about. And she will take a couple of these trends, look at where they are right now, and then say, what if this one went up and then this one went down? Or what if these two did different things together? What scenario would that create? And so she, does research and interviews experts and writes reports, which are really interesting with different scenarios. The report that she wrote together with Bob Blakely, who was at Citigroup at the time, unfortunately didn't mention anything about the pandemic and about everybody having to go home and about the rise of SASE as a result of that dynamic. So this just goes to show you that you can't predict the future, but here's what you can do. You can reverse your assumptions. You can identify the constants that we take for granted. For example, we used to believe that, who thought that a shared fingerprint reader for biometrics would be a problem? Well, it became a problem when we worried about a shared fingerprint reader being unsanitary and sharing germs. So that was an assumption we took for granted, and it got disrupted during the pandemic. So identify those constants that we automatically take for granted, and then we reverse them to identify potential disruptions. We believe that this is always going to be true, but what if it's not? But do not try to predict what form the disruption will take, because there are so many ways that it can be disrupted. We just need to think about being prepared for that change. Let me give you an example. Let's take football. So Could you predict after somebody kicks a ball where the ball's going to be? Probably. You have a pretty good idea based on where the player aimed and where they are in the game and what they might be strategically aiming for. So you could get a pretty good range of where you think the ball's going to be. How about 10 minutes into the game? You will have no idea how to predict where that ball is going to be. So let's think about this and let's play with the assumptions. What are we assuming? We're assuming that players have places where they're assigned, places where they are trying to drive to for strategic reasons, where the ball is going to be. What if we could disrupt those assumptions? How about if we didn't have to care where the ball was going to be? Now, what would have to happen for that to be true? Well, if we took everybody and put them in front of the goal, then we wouldn't have to care where the ball was going to be anymore because we know it couldn't get into the goal. So that's a way of identifying a disruption. Now, of course, if you put everybody in front of the goal and they stayed there, you wouldn't score any points either, and that's kind of the point of the game. So it's not a perfect analogy. If you've got a better one, let me know. But this is an example of playing with your assumptions and going, well, what if that wasn't true? Would we be prepared? Or in one of my favorite hacker movies, Real Genius, as Chris Knight says, would you be prepared if gravity were to reverse itself? So think about those things when you're thinking about the future. And I see that we have a couple of comments in the chat. That's great. I don't have time to look at them right now, but I'm excited. Please keep adding comments. Let's talk about being ready for the future. So in order to do this, you pick the future that you want and then try to backcast it or reverse engineer it. If you think, we would like to have these conditions in place in the future, what could we put in place now to make sure that that happens? That is another thing, another exercise that you can go through. But remember that the solution might not be technology. It might be a combination of people and process and technology. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more in a few slides. So pick the future that you would like to see. Of course, everybody has a plan, but it doesn't always work. The other question I would pose to you is, do you want precision or accuracy in your vision of the future? And I borrowed this from the FAIR Institute because I love this distinction. You would think that precision and accuracy are the same, but they're not. Look at this target here, and you'll see that the accurate one is not precise. All the marks on the target are kind of spread out, but they're all on the target. So, it did the job. Now, in the other one, they are precise, but they're not on the target, so they're not accurate. So do you want to be wrong about the future with, 5 decimal points of precision? Do you want to be precisely wrong, or do you want to be more or less accurate, but it doesn't matter if it's too precise or not? Think about that also when you're doing your planning. Now I'm going to give you something else to help you, because wouldn't it be nice if we actually knew what works in cybersecurity? I don't know about you, but I really don't like benchmarks from peers, because if I see a report that says your peers are doing this and this and this in security, I think, well, that's great, but what if they're really bad at security? That's not going to help me. So we at Cisco, together with the Scientia Institute, and those are some of the folks who founded the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, so you know they're legit. We did some research, we asked people around the world, this year it was 5,100 respondents, what they were doing or in terms of practices in cybersecurity, but we didn't ask them what they thought worked. Instead, we asked them about particular outcomes that they wanted from their program. And then we did a statistical analysis to see whether any of the practices they were doing actually affected the outcomes, or whether they correlated with the outcomes. So let me show you an example of the program outcomes. It's not just about not getting hacked. These are some of the program outcomes that you might be wanting for your program. Everything from keeping up with the business, minimizing unplanned work. That would be really nice, wouldn't it? Recruiting and retaining talent, meeting compliance regulations, creating a strong culture. All of these things are things that our respondents had told us that they wanted from a security program. So we asked them, how well do you think you're doing on these outcomes? And then we tried to balance them. So we asked them about 25 different practices. This was in last year's study against these. I guess they've split them up now. The 12 different outcomes. Last year they were 11. And what we did was this. I'm sorry, you probably can't read this on your screen. I'm not expecting you to, but we matched every practice and analyzed it against every outcome to see which ones had a stronger statistical impact. Now, if you want to go to see this yourself, we have an interactive version of this where you can highlight one row and see what it corresponds to. It's a lot easier than trying to do this on this slide. If you go to cisco.com.go.security outcomes or security outcomes 2 is this year's report, you can play with this yourself. Now you'll notice that the darker the square here, the more statistical correlation there was. So the most correlated one was if you have a practice of proactive technology refresh and you feel like it's a priority, you're doing it a lot, it is 8.9% more likely that you will report being able to keep up with the business if you do that. And if you look at it that way, yeah, it kind of makes sense because the business will be better served if you're keeping everything refreshed. As you can also see in this chart, there are practices that statistically did not correlate with outcomes, with any outcomes. If somebody owns compliance, that's the third from the left on the bottom there, it doesn't seem to statistically correlate with any good outcomes. And I suspect that it's just that in and of itself, somebody having an in compliance in their title doesn't help you get any closer to meeting compliance regulations. You have to do the other practices that are actually highlighted here as including proactive tech refresh. And let me follow this along and see what else. If you look along meeting compliance regulations and you see all the blue squares, like role-specific training and things like that, those are the practices that we determined to have a statistical effect on being able to get that outcome. So this research is ongoing, and if you have comments on that too, I'd love to hear it too. What we did this year was we picked the top 5 most statistically significant practices. We call them the Fabulous 5. And we looked deeper into why they seem to be so impactful, like proactive tech refresh. What kind of tech? How often should you be refreshing it? Who should be refreshing it? And that's those are the subjects of this year's report. And I know it looks really kind of convenient for Cisco that the proactive tech refresh and well-integrated tech were so highly rated, but I promise you it was a double-blind study. We did not know who was answering and they didn't know who was asking. And even we were surprised by the extent to which these two stood out as being really, really impactful on all the outcomes, even on recruiting and retaining talent, which kind of makes sense because I don't think anybody wants to be a DB2 admin for their entire career. So those things sound really great, but you think, great, what if we don't have the money to do this or to get new technology? We have to work with what we have. The thing I want to point out is the other top 3 are practices that don't necessarily require you to buy anything new. Timely incident response is something you can practice. And Bryson talked about this in his keynote just before mine. Prompt disaster recovery and accurate threat detection. If you are practicing things over and over again, you're going to get better at them. And this is something that you can train your people to do, and this will help future-proof your program, because no matter what happens next year, your people are going to be able to react better to it. So this is one of the most important messages that I can give you, is in the people side and the process side, practice. Another thing that is in this year's report that we thought was really interesting was we asked respondents how many different types of business continuity and disaster recovery exercises they were doing. Bryson mentioned a tabletop, but there are other different types of exercises that you can do. And we asked about 5 different types of exercises, and the more different ones that an organization did, the more likely they were to report having a strong BCDR program. So practicing more differently actually helps strengthen that muscle. We also found that those who embraced chaos engineering, those who used what you call chaos monkeys, something that goes around and automatically breaks random things in your environment so that you can practice fixing them, they did even better. They were more likely, I think 90% or something, more likely to report having a strong BCDR program. And it makes sense. Again, if you're practicing just one scenario over and over and over again, like every 6 months, you're not going to be as strong as if you are practicing having something break things you never predicted and having to figure out how to respond to them. So this is another way to strengthen your relationship with the future, is practice that unpredictability and practice that variety with your people. So people and process programs. You can work on incident response, you can work on maintaining situational awareness, measuring and reporting, communicating, talking. These are all things that will help you get ready for the future no matter what happens. And the other thing is that if you don't have time to work on all 25 security practices that we identified, if you work on these top 5, you are 79% more likely to come out on top of and report that you have a strong overall security program. So this is great. You can pick just 5 of these. I don't like the word shortcut. I didn't make this slide. Marketing made this slide. But let's just say this is kind of a speed ramp, or it's a way of prioritizing what you're going to work on. If you work on the top 5, you're going to get a bigger bang for the buck. You're going to be more likely to get large improvements in your program. Now, I'm going to share some wisdom from Andy Ellis. Many of you have probably seen Andy Ellis here at Tactical Edge before or in other places. He's full of wisdom. So here we go. A trick is to not commit yourself to one path. Find improvements that are intrinsically helpful while also being building blocks for large improvements, so that you're ready to execute on apparently big projects when the moment is right. And he's a smart guy. That's so true. So let's look at, in summary, what we can do to ease our uncomfortable relationship with the future. We're going to plan better by reversing assumptions that we have and looking beyond technology for solutions. We're going to maximize flexibility, but keep your eye on the ball. Don't get distracted by ideas of precision when what you really want is accuracy. And hedge your bets. If there are things that you can develop in parallel that have dual purposes or even more than one purpose, make sure that you're looking at your efforts from that perspective. Also, learn what makes the biggest difference. Go out there and do some research as to not just what conventional wisdom says you should be doing in your program, but what is actually going to get you further. And again, as I mentioned, people and process improvements have value regardless of how the technology changes. So this is another important thing, and have more than one purpose for your projects. Final thoughts. Here's another thing that Heather pointed out to me about the future. The problems that we're dealing with today were created by solutions in our past. Remember when somebody said, wouldn't it be cool if we could send a message from one computer to another? Well, maybe you don't remember that, but I remember that. Somebody solved that problem, and now look at our inboxes. Just look at them. That's another problem. So what new problems are we going to create for our future? As you are creating your plans, think about that and make sure to document your thinking when you're doing this planning. Because if you're like me, 5 years down the road, you're going to look at something and go, ooh, who thought that was a good idea? Oh yeah, that was me. So future you and your future colleagues are going to appreciate you writing down your thinking about why you thought you were going to solve this problem this way right now, because you may be at the same time creating a different problem in the future. I didn't mean to depress you all at the end, but you know, we just got to be careful because none of us really know what's coming. We just know what we're going to do today. So let's create the future together. As long as we do it together, I think we're going to be okay. All right.
Wow, as always, Wendy, really, really great stuff there. Yeah, let's start with the last comment. Solutions that we create today will create problems in the future. It's like, what's the
Well,
same?
I don't know if they will, but they're more likely to. It's true.
So it's almost like the symbol with the snake eating itself.
Yeah, the Ouroboros. Yeah, exactly.
There was a couple of questions here. If I don't know who this came from, but it says exercises are free training. If you war game someone else's breach as if it happened to you, you are sharpening our own incident response practices.
That's exactly right. That is right. And that might have been Bryson or somebody else, but absolutely, if you war game someone else's breach as if it happened to you, you are helping your own IR practices. That's what Target was doing. I know other organizations that do that too, and it is useful. It is. Let's see. A CISO said to me once. You know, they have a lot of trouble getting money for improvements, and sometimes it takes a breach to get that money for them. And they said, if we're lucky, it's someone else's breach. So I have actually seen that happen too, where a large telco provider saw that they had been wanting to upgrade the encryption on their point of sale systems in their retail stores, but that would have cost 27,000 truck rolls to locations all over the place. But when another telco had a similar breach, all of a sudden within 3 days, they had the millions of dollars approved for that upgrade, and they were able to do it. So absolutely take advantage of a breach in your peer group, not only to help motivate your management to do what you need, but also as that exercise to say, could we even notice this if it happened to us? What would it look like? Yeah, very good comment.
One of your first slides talked about eliminating TTPs, you know, the higher paying pyramid. Try to eliminate as much as you can to make it more difficult. We're talking about exchanging communications, which has been a mantra of yours for many, many years, right?
Mm-hmm.
To telling the CISOs, you have to learn how to exchange and share information. The first time I heard you say that was about 5 or 6 years ago, mm-hmm. when you were leading one of the first CISO workshops in Tactical Edge in Bogota. Is that still true? Do you see advancement in that regards? Are CISOs sharing more information now?
Yes and no. You know, when I was working for the retail and hospitality ISAC, we were trying to solve this problem. And it is a problem because trust tends to happen between individuals, not between organizations. So you know somebody at another bank and you like them and you get together for drinks and you share a lot of things. But if that person leaves, your bank is not going to trust their bank just because you said, I used to know somebody there. So it is very difficult. There are also groups that will only take threat intelligence from other orgs where they are kind of at the same level of technological maturity. They might say, these folks, we're not getting useful indicators from them. We really only want from these people because they know what they're talking about. And that's kind of sad, because if you're not a mature organization, how are you going to learn except from getting wisdom and IOCs from those who know more? So there are a lot of different ways to try to figure this out. And I would just say, however you can share, if you have a personal relationship with somebody and you go out with them, you're more likely to give them more details that they need to know about an attack, and say, we did this, and then the adversary saw it, then they did this, so then when we reacted by doing this, and by the way, this didn't work, we got completely owned. You're not going to say that in an ISAC, but it is impossible for us to defend together if we don't find out at least a way to share and build trust with those that we trust the most.
Yeah, absolutely. Our co-host Andres has a question. Is the future of cybersecurity a matter of probability or possibilities?
I think that's the biggest gap between management and CISOs, to be honest. Everybody will talk about possibilities, and they may agree on impact when you're talking about risk. You'll say, yes, if that happened, we would lose $11 billion in federal funding. We agree on that, but we don't think it's going to happen. So it's the probability. Your management thinks it's not as probable, or they might say, let's just wait until it becomes really probable, like really probable, and then we'll spend the money on it. Because one tenet of business is you don't spend money on anything that you don't absolutely have to spend it on. So if you can wait until the last minute and then spend the money right before the breach, you won, because you saved money as long as you could. But the problem is the timing, and we do not know the timing.
Exactly.
So yeah, there are a lot of organizations that are saying, well, we don't need this right yet. Let's wait until we actually need it. But then too often, by the time they need it, it's just a little bit too late.
The last example that you gave, again, where we started about the solutions, the problems that we have today were solutions from the past, and you tie that up to the example with automation, and that and that they still had somebody check to make sure that it was okay, but the check was done after the change was made. That goes with that statement.
Yeah, it's like, what? That's right. And obviously they feel confident enough in their automation that they think there are not going to be any bad side effects from the automation, even if it was a false positive. That's how they can do that. So, if you're going to, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example, but if you are automating an action that is not going to hurt anything, and it might help if it really is an emergency, then the odds are in your favor. They're on your side. It won't hurt if it's a false positive. It'll just be, oh, we didn't really need to do that, but okay, let's reset it. But that's again why you need to be really careful with your automation.
Exactly. And again, it's in the slide you had, automation goes best with certainty, precision, transparency, and commitment. Then in another slide, you had something that I highlighted, people and process improvement, right? In order to do process improvement, you have to investigate, you have to know exactly how a process happens. You have to know everything about that. So basically, if you're trying to automate, you have to do your homework, and your homework is identify what are your processes, how are your people using these processes, and then based on that, now you have part of this, of the automation, which is certainty and precision. And then you can select the technology that goes with it. It shouldn't be technology driving that. It should be.
Right. It shouldn't be technology driving the process, because as a vendor, I can tell you that when an engineer is, building a security product, they have certain assumptions about how the process is going to go. And one of my jobs as an advisory CISO is to go, no, or, you would not believe what they use this for in the field. So that's a really important point, that, you have to, your technology should not be driving your processes. Your processes should be driving your technology.
And should the processes be business driven? Again, Bryson's talk was about how to speak, with the elephants and whatever. So from a business perspective, your processes, even though you're from a technical perspective, the outcome should be to better help the business continue doing what the business is supposed to be doing to make money.
That's right. And sometimes you will not agree with the business, or they will have different priorities. And it is important to go to them and say, if this happens, do you want us to shut this down? And they may say, oh God, no. And you'll say, but the attackers will be in, and they'll say, I don't care. Do not shut it down.
Right.
Because I like to point this out, that sometimes we have breaches that do not affect the business. They, things are still running. We're still taking orders. We're still shipping. We're still making money. And if that's the case, then from the business point of view, it looks like it's just kind of a reindeer game between you and the attackers. Ooh, they got in, tag, you're it. But as long as it doesn't impact their availability, and if it's not going to result in lawsuits or fines or anything like that, they're like, I really don't see what the big deal is. So this is a reality that we have to live with as security professionals, that their priorities are not always ours. And if it upsets you really that much, then you really should think about, moving to a different organization where they're more aligned with your own priorities. But we're always going to be more purist in security than our business leaders are.
Right. Well, I mean, again, that's what we're there for, right? And we start to think within our own bubble instead of realizing we're just part of a larger organization. Eric Belardo, one of our upcoming
one of our speakers.
Yeah, he says we probably need, as an industry, to keep supporting the CISOs, but target the messaging to CEOs and boards. And that's what Bryson was also saying, correct?
Yeah, that's a good point. The World Economic Forum came out with a really interesting report on kind of how to talk to the board. If you get a chance, look at that one. But there are always ways we can improve. The Scientia Institute also did a report on how, what kind of messaging to the board appeared to help more. So if you look at their site, there's some reading there. And I agree. Supporting CISOs and helping translate between them and the board is so valuable.
Exactly. Wendy, I know that you have a full agenda, so really appreciate your time here with us. Coming up next is one of our mutual friends, Andrea Limbago. So
yay, Andrea!
Yeah, she's on next. She hasn't connected yet, but I appreciate your time here with us. Last Tactical Edge of the year. Any parting words to the CISOs present from someone that advises CISOs worldwide?
I would say, I know everybody is doing their best, and especially right now with everything going on, it's hard to remember that you really are making a difference long term. I have trouble with this myself, that you always think about what's happening this week or this month and think, oh God. But if you try to look at the year-long trend, look back at everything you did, everything you learned, everything you taught to other people, I think you'll find that you have made a difference, each one of you, and we need to celebrate that too. That's really important.
Oh, by the way, one of the comments that was made here, it was not Bryson, it was Ryan English who made it.
Oh,
So he said to
Rogelio.
stop giving West Point guys credit.
Oh, Rogelio, come on, be nice.
So, anyway, Army, yes. All right, Wendy, thank you so much. Really, I really
right.
appreciate it. So love seeing you here.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks.